Yes, it is. Luke chapter 10, start here in verse 1. Now, the last couple of weeks we've been, feels like we kind of went a little backwards in the book of Matthew. We looked at some passages in Matthew 11. And we maybe should have done this Luke bit first. Because between Matthew 11 and Luke 10, there's a lot of overlap. It would be, it's sort of clear that that Matthew and Luke were drawing their gospel from similar sources. But Luke chose to include some things that Matthew didn't. And that's the beauty of having four gospels, is that you get to see slightly different perspectives on everything. In the NIV, this passage in Luke is entitled, Jesus Sends Out the 72. And as we read through it, you'll probably hear some things that you think, no, wait a minute. Didn't we cover this already? And the answer is yes. Yes, we did last week. So after this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. He told them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Go, I am sending you out like lambs among wolves. Don't take a purse or bag or sandals, and do not greet anyone on the road. When you enter a house, first say, peace to the house. If someone who promotes peace is there, your peace will rest on them. If not, it will return to you. Stay there, eating and drinking whatever they give you, for the worker deserves his wages. Do not move around from house to house. When you enter a town and are welcomed, eat what is offered to you. Heal the sick who are there and tell them the kingdom of God has come near to you. But when you enter a town and are not welcomed, go into its streets and say, even the dust of your town we wipe from our feet as a warning to you. Yet be sure of this, the kingdom of God has come near. I tell you, it will be more bearable on that day for Sodom than for that town. Then we definitely talked about this last time. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago, sitting in sackcloth and ashes. But it will be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon at the judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be lifted up to the heavens? No, you'll go down to Hades. Whoever listens to you, listens to me. Whoever rejects you, rejects me. But whoever rejects me, rejects him who sent me. Okay, so that's the instruction for these 72 missionary pairs who are being sent out. Then in verse 17, the 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. He replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I've given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. At that time, Jesus, full of joy through the Holy Spirit, said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows who the Son is except the Father, and no one knows who the Father is except the Son and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Then he turned to his disciples and said privately, Blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I tell you that many prophets and kings wanted to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Okay. the first 12 verses there in Luke 10 are unique. We've already seen in our previous studies that Jesus had sent out the 12 disciples in pairs to go out and to do some teaching and preaching in his name, to do ministry, making sure that people were fed, that if there was healing that needed to be done, that they would do it, and the power to cast out evil spirits as well. So now Luke tells us here in chapter 10 that Jesus expands the mission and expands the mission team from 12 to 72. This is not something that we read in any of the other gospels. Luke is the only one who tells about the sending of the 72. But their mission is to go to all the places where Jesus intends to go between now and Jerusalem, and to do the similar kind of thing. They're supposed to go to the town. They're supposed to share the news, do some teaching and preaching. If there's healing needed, to do that. And then after they have sort of gone and planted that seed, then Jesus will come himself later, and should be able to do more ministry in each of those places. So it's sort of interesting. I know that I've read Luke 10:2 1,000 times. The harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. I have heard so many sermons, missionary sermons, global evangelism sermons about that passage. We need to be praying that God will rise up missionaries to send them out into the world to take the good news. But I don't know, I can't recall. I probably heard it in Bible college, but it may have been a 7 a.m. class and I wasn't really all the way awake yet. But I've never really read those verses in their context. Jesus is saying to these 72, look, time is growing short. I am heading to Jerusalem. This will be my last trip to Jerusalem. And so we need to cover as much ground and do as much good as we can possibly do, because it's time. And if it's not time today, it's going to be time tomorrow. It's soon. So I'm sending you out to prepare these fields to be harvested. And when he tells them to go, some of it seems a little abrupt. Did you pick up what I hear in there in those instructions? As you go along the road,
Don't waste any time.
don't waste any time. Don't stop and chat. Don't greet anybody along the way. You get to where you're going. Like, well, that doesn't seem right. That's just being friendly and polite and nice. That's being civilized. Jesus says,
Ain't got time for that.
move. Now, I do not know what what Middle Eastern hospitality along the side of the road would require of somebody, but it could be that that's a longer process. That's not just, hey, how you doing? Where you headed? Oh, have a good trip. Maybe it's more like, let's sit down and have some and yogurt and eat a few dates and, pray a blessing on each other. I don't really know. But whatever the time frame could have been, Jesus says, don't do it. You get to where you're headed. This is urgent. Okay. The time is drawing near, and we don't have a lot of time to waste. So just get there. Now, when you get to the town, here's some instructions as well. You go in, you find somebody who looks like, does anybody's translation have something like a man of peace there? Yeah. If you find a man of peace, somebody who's committed to peace, like Jesus's disciples would be, you go with that person, you stay with that person. You're not there to skip around long enough to go from place to place to place to place. If they invite you in, if they extend hospitality, you go in and you accept it and you stay there until it's time for you to come home. Again, if you're always packing and unpacking and meeting new people and all that new stuff all the time, you're missing out on opportunities to teach and serve and heal.
They were also told not to pack,
Yeah, we're not taking much.
not even shoes.
You take what you've got on, and you are going to be taken care of in the places where you go. The hospitality will be extended to you. Accept it. Now, there's probably some kind of a lesson there for some of us people who don't want to put anybody else out. Can I get you a drink? No, I'm fine. Can I take you out for lunch? No, I'm really okay. That's rude. If somebody's offering, apparently the principle here is somebody extends hospitality to you, you accept it. Now, I suppose you could make the argument that it ought to just be if you're doing missionary work, but I think that's splitting some hairs there. If people are going to extend grace and hospitality to you, it's being loving. We should accept what they have to offer.
Do you have
And be
any
gracious about
idea what the average population of these towns was?
I do not. Somebody probably does.
It probably vary, but I just,
Well, as you look, he's coming from up here and he is heading south. I mean, that's a lot of brown here. There are some towns, like Scythopolis. That's one of the places that we visited. It's a pretty big place, but there's a lot of not much noteworthy. I mean, it's not like the 80 miles from Logan to Provo here, where you're perpetually in town all the time. It would have been a lot more sparse. Let's see here. Is there anything else I wanted to talk about? If you get rejected, if somebody says, we don't want you, get out of here. Don't fight it. Again, not because we're being selfish or rude, but because time is of the essence. You come to a little burg and they don't want anything to do with you. Don't wear yourself out, banging your head against the wall. Move on. Shake the dust from your feet. This is all on you. We've washed our hands of this. This is now your issue between you and God. You rejected his message, so you're rejecting Jesus, you're rejecting the one who sent him. Any thoughts or comments? Yes, Steve.
It's not really. But
Okay.
it seems like it should be the same. My Bible says 7.
Yeah, there's a footnote in mine that says some manuscripts have 70, some have 72.
But there are these returns.
mine says 70.
But wouldn't there be 84?
What's that?
So wouldn't there be 84? If the Lord appointed 72 others? Would that be other than the disciples?
Well, that's where that others comes from, is the conversation about the disciples in the paragraph before. So I'm going to assume that the original disciples who were sent, which makes them then what? That's a kind of an obscure thing. Somebody who has been sent is called an apostle. Apostello means I send. So the original 12 disciples, once Jesus sends them out to teach and preach and heal, are now technically apostles. So if those 12 have gone out once and come back and reported in, now Jesus is sending 72 others who are followers of his disciples. So if we're just going with what the words mean, they are now also apostles because they've been sent out. Now we attribute that word apostle now to some kind of specific title, and probably more here in Utah than in other places. I didn't hear about anybody being called an apostle other than living here. But the word just means one who is sent. So at least the first round 12, now there's 72. So at least 72 are going out. It might be 84. They're all going out. So if there's 84 and they're being sent in pairs, that's right, exactly 42 pairs. Good math there.
There.
That's good.
It's early.
So, I mean, they're being sent all over. Here's where I think I'm gonna go. I want you to go out ahead of me and teach, do some preaching. If there are sick people, heal them. If you encounter people with evil spirits, cast them out. Because we're headed there soon. Anything else? All right. Verses 13, 14, and 15 are identical to what we covered back in Matthew 11.
Can I ask another question?
Yes,
Sorry, there was something else.
there was.
So do not go from house to house. Whenever you enter a town, they receive you, eat what is set before you. So it feels like they go to a house and they're not received, they leave the town.
Probably went into a town
What's-
square first.
Was the towns maybe, were they all like-minded, you think? Like if one house sent them out, all the others would have?
Have you ever lived in a small town? I
Yes.
mean, a really small town?
No.
Okay. Well, having grown up in a wide spot in the road, there is sort of a vibe to the place. And if you ride in and you ask for directions at the general store and they tell you, we don't want your kind here, it's not unusual to find that that's the case with everybody there. Yeah. Again, I think it has a lot to do with the speed of the mission. If there was more time, maybe the answer would be different. But look, we don't have time to go knocking on door after door after door to find somebody who will let us in. You go to the town and it feels weird. There's this negative vibe there. They clearly are not hospitable. They don't want to hear from you. Move on. You don't have to unpack. Just move your backpack to the other shoulder and take off to the next place.
The news travels fast.
True. Especially in a small town. There is a line in there that I hadn't paid much attention to until I was reading it out loud. Whatever they feed you, eat that. When I was in college, I was on a traveling team. The first 2 years, it was a group of 6 students, 3 guys, 3 girls, and we traveled on weekends during the semester and all summer long, going to the churches and church camps and special things like that to sing. And in our training, before we left, we had a lot of teaching about receiving hospitality. When you go into somebody's home, you will always write a thank you note and leave it there for the family. You will always be gracious. You will not make a fuss. You will not make a mess. You will clean up after yourselves. You will be the height of politeness and responsibility. And one of the lessons that they drilled into was where he leads me, I will follow. What they feed me, I will swallow.
Oh,
You sit down at a dinner in somebody's house and they have been saving up chicken gizzards and livers for the last 2 months to feed you. You eat that mess and you smile and say, thank you, may I have another?
Here, kitty, kitty, kitty.
Yeah. So most of the time it was a little church potluck and there was no problems. Like, oh yeah, I can eat this fried chicken. Not issue. But there were times like, I do not know what this is, and it's not very good, but I have to eat it. So where he leads me, I will follow. What they feed me, I will swallow. Just go ahead and embroider that on a thing and hang that on the wall. Okay. Okay. Now, so Jesus sends them out, 1 through 16. But then right after that in Luke 10:17, we get an after action report. And what's the report when the 72 come back?
Yay.
Joy.
Wow, it was so awesome. Jesus, this was incredible. They have a very good report. They taught people, they healed people, they cast evil spirits out, they come back full of joy. There's probably a minor lesson in there as well. Maybe some encouragement. That doing what God has asked us to do, even when we don't know what we're doing, really will turn out to be kind of a good thing. We may go out with a little bit of, but when it's all over, we're full of joy. And who else is joyful? Yeah, Jesus goes on, he's kind of pumped as well, that they've had this incredible experience. But he reminds them at the end that while it's okay for them to think that it was great that they had this incredible ministry experience, really the most important thing is what? What about their names? By the end of the passage.
Written in heaven.
Yeah, that their names are written in heaven. You know, it's great that you all went out and did really good ministry, and I'm grateful for it, but I am more rejoicing, and so should you, that you have found salvation. That's really the message you were sent to give, was that salvation is here. So let's not lose sight of that. That's the bigger excitement. It is a joy to serve Jesus, but our greater joy is that we have an eternal home with him. Big thoughts before we get to the one tricky verse in the whole deal? Okay. Verse 19. Verse 19. I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. Okay, so there are people who love Jesus, who have read this passage and have applied it to themselves now to say, I can pick up any snake I want, venomous or not. But if I want, I can stick my hand in a bucket full of scorpions. The promise right here is that they cannot hurt me. I don't know if you know about snake handling churches.
uh,
Kind of pass on those.
Yeah, this will not be one of those, because I hate snakes.
Me too.
When I read through this, I do not see that Jesus is giving an invitation to his followers to be reckless and to handle venomous creatures like snakes and scorpions. When we go all the way back to Genesis, what is the first promise that is made about the seed of the woman in Genesis 3? Okay, you are going to crush the head of the serpent. You're going to defeat the enemy. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. The only snake handling will be taken care of by Jesus. Ultimately, the powerful enemy of God, the serpent, Satan, is going to be destroyed by God through Jesus's death on the cross. Jesus is giving his disciples power over the enemy team. The minions of evil spirits will not be able to hurt the disciples. The disciples have nothing to fear as they carry out this kind of ministry, because the good guys are going to win. The enemy will be destroyed. They have authority given to them by the authoritative Son of God to carry out this kind of ministry. And so they got nothing to worry about. If you want to think otherwise about this passage, and you're prepared to do your own lab experiments with cobras and vipers and scorpions, by all means, make sure that your phone is recording it as it occurs, and let us know what kind of snakes they are, so we can carry you to the ER and get the proper anti-venom.
I kind of feel like we do enough stupid stuff by accident. without
Not to
planning.
do it on purpose. The disciples have nothing to fear. When you're smack dab in the middle of the will of Jesus for your life, there's nothing really to be afraid of. Spiders and snakes, whatever. We have already looked at the content in verses 21 and 22 last time in Matthew 11:25-27. The upshot is those people who are open to faith will be able to find it. The Jewish leadership is not open to it, at least most of them, and so they're going to miss it. But those who are willing to consider it and have open minds, ears, and hearts, they'll be able to accept the truth. And these followers of Jesus that he has already sent out once or twice, they are the little ones he's talking about. They are the little children. They have accepted the truth. And then Jesus makes this comment about prophets and kings who have waited to see what they've seen and to hear what they've heard. And that to me seems like it is one more claim of Jesus, although it's not an expressed one, sort of a between the lines deal, where Jesus is saying, I am the Messiah. Kings and prophets for centuries have longed to see this time in history. They wish that they could hear the words of the Messiah. And now you have. They would love to have traded places with you to be able to hear this, to see this, to experience this firsthand. you are extra blessed for it. Questions or comments?
James,
Yes, Joan?
on verse 19,
Yes,
where it says, "You will not be harmed
yes.
while you are doing my will," that was only to these that were sent out, right? Because we have a lot of missionaries that are harmed.
That would be
Right.
true. There are missionaries who are captured, beaten, tortured, and executed in horrible ways. And I suppose if we could split hairs and say, well, they may have suffered physical harm, but they didn't suffer any spiritual harm. They remained faithful all the way to the very end. Nobody can take your faith away from you. Nobody can kill your faith unless
Right.
you allow them to. It would seem certainly like Jesus is making a promise about this spiritual health and well-being, definitely to these people who are going out in Luke 10. There's probably some application for all of us who will go and do his will elsewhere in the world. I don't know that we can believe that we're bulletproof and Teflon. But ultimately we know, I don't have the book, chapter, and verse in my head right off the top. But don't worry about those who can kill the body, but those who can kill the soul.
But if he had meant that all missionaries or all apostles would be safe from snakes and scorpions, then wouldn't you think it would be in all four gospels as being more important than just these 84 people?
That may be a fair point. I can't answer that with any definite authority, but that would seem reasonable. Because, we all know stories of missionaries who took off for someplace else, and either they got some kind of disease when they got there, or they were injured by lions and tigers and bears and mosquitoes and monkeys or whatever, or they were killed by the natives. I think primarily about Jim Elliot, the movie. The people he went to save killed him. So
we shouldn't take this one verse as gospel, that if we're going to go out and share the good news, we will be protected. Is that correct?
I don't think that is a wise thing to try to apply. Because there are other verses that say, if you're a follower of Jesus, you will be persecuted for your faith.
Right. Okay.
So, I don't know how you can have them both be true at the same time. Clearly, the application for us is we cannot be spiritually destroyed by somebody else's actions. We go, we follow God's will, we carry out his plan in our lives, and they may hurt us, they may beat us, they may kill us, but they cannot take away our faith in God.
Okay. Thank you.
That's what I'm going with anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Of the original 12, only John died an old man, and he had been in exile for years on Patmos. So, but the tradition is that every other one of them was murdered. So it's not, we can look here and say, well, it didn't even carry out to the end of the apostles' lives. You can't be harmed? Well.
Right.
Clearly, there has to be some amount of this that is local to this one specific incident. Or else the apostles would have hung on forever.
If we take that verse as an allusion to Genesis, doesn't that change the whole perspective of the verse away from physical security to spiritual security?
Okay, so in case you can't hear that on the microphone, the question is, we apply this to the Genesis passage, doesn't it have obviously less to do with physical and has more to do with the spiritual? Did I get that right? I had not followed that trail. But it seems like that would be appropriate. I mean, Jesus, in crushing heads and serpents and scorpions, if it's a reference to spiritual warfare, it would seem like that the damage you're being protected from would also be spiritual damage, spiritual pain. Okay. Wow, it's deep in here today. Well, let's move on then. The next piece in Luke's gospel is a very well-known parable of Jesus found in Luke 10:25-37. The Blue Letter Bible. If you're ever looking for something to do a little extra study, you can check that out online, blueletterbible.com, I think. It matches up this Luke 10:25 passage with a passage from Matthew 22, verses 34-40, and Mark 12:28-34, where the emphasis in those two passages is on the greatest or most important of the commandments. Hey, Jesus, what's the most important commandment? What's the greatest one? Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second one is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commands. Here in Luke's gospel, there's a request afterward for the definition of a neighbor. Well, okay, the loving God thing, I understand. Loving my neighbor, I'll love, but I need you to tell me who my neighbor is. And so Jesus tells a parable to illustrate that. Verse 25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus replied, you have answered correctly. Do this, and you'll live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Okay, we've already talked a number of times about the tensions between the Samaritans and the Jews. I feel like that is plowed ground. We don't have to really hit that again. They didn't like each other. They didn't get along. Did everything they could to avoid each other. So Jesus tells this story. A man is coming from Jerusalem. He is going to Jericho. He says he's coming down or going down. You know why? Even though Jericho is north of Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem is on the top of a hill. And whatever direction you go from Jerusalem, you're going down. You can go down south for sure, but you can go down north, down west, or east. Okay. So Jesus says that the man is traveling from the mountain, Mount Zion, traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, which would have been up north and east of the city of Jerusalem, between Jerusalem and the Jordan River. You may remember that in the Old Testament that Jericho is one of the first cities that the Israelites experienced as they were crossing into the Promised Land. That's where they marched around the city and the walls fell down. It was an important city, very strong walls, been around for a really long time. And in Jesus' day, there were still people traveling to Jericho. Sort of maybe a little garden spot. There was a lot of irrigation there. They did farming. Anyway, so this man is traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho through rocks and roads and hills and things. And as he goes, bandits attack. They beat him, they strip him, they rob him, and they leave him for dead. Whether they think he's dead or just believe he's going to die, we don't really know. But then they take off with all of his stuff. The road is well traveled. A priest is coming from Jerusalem on the road as well. How do we know that? How do we know that he's traveling this? He's coming down. He's going down the same road. He passes by on the other side. And here's where we'll just play some speculative what if. If he's a priest coming from Jerusalem, it is entirely possible that he has been serving at the temple, because you only served at the temple when your number came up. You would go and you would serve for as long as that period was, and then you would go back to your home. Well, this priest is coming from Jerusalem, so he could have been serving in the temple, mediating between his people, Israel, and God, making sacrifices, burning incense, offering up prayers. It would have been a great honor to serve at the temple, sort of like the religious peak of your life. He's going back home and sees a man in need and walks by. A Levite comes along. Well, now we don't really know exactly if he's heading up the hill or down the hill, but he's on the same road. And in case you don't know what a Levite is, you are from the tribe of Levi. That's the tribe that Moses and Aaron were from. The Levites, that's the tribe that the priests were selected from all the time. And members of the tribe of Levi were assistants to the priests in worship at the temple. They killed the animals, butchered the animals, stoked the fire, cleaned the pots and pans, did the washing, all of the behind the scenes support work for the ministry at the temple. That was what Levites did.
So you should be a good person.
You would like to think so. You'd like to think so. Again, maybe he has been serving at the temple and has been, involved in ministering for the people, connecting God and Israel. And now he's traveling along the road, sees this man, can't be bothered with it. If he's going up the hill, he's headed to Jerusalem, you might be able to make the argument that, well, if he touches blood, if he touches a dead body, then he would be considered unclean and he wouldn't be able to serve. So he's just protecting his ministry opportunities. That's sweet.
Yeah, because there's a way to get clean.
Right. There are ways to deal with that uncleanness. So you've got those two, the priest and Levite. And then Jesus says, and then there's this third man. He's from Samaria. And he comes along and sees the victim along the side of the road. And the text says he had pity on him, or maybe he had compassion for him. And guess what? It's my most favorite of Greek words. Splanchnizomai. His guts went out to him. He was filled with compassion. It's the same thing that we've seen Jesus say about himself numerous times in the gospel so far.
He did write that up.
Just put it on my
In the office trying to pronounce it.
just put it on my tombstone.
Must be said, yeah.
The Samaritan, because of his splunkna, is because of his guts, because he can't not do something. Rescues the victim, cares for him, takes him to an inn, pays for his care, promises to cover any other expenses personally. And then Jesus asked the question to the teacher of the law. Which one was the neighbor to the victim? And obviously the answer is the Samaritan.
Despicable Samaritan.
And you know what? I'm sure I'm reading into it, but maybe not. The expert in the law can't even say that. He doesn't say the Samaritan. He says the one who had mercy on
Yeah.
him. Now, so this parable is all about what? Don't make it too hard.
Mercy, compassion.
Yeah, having compassion for others, showing mercy to others, because that's what you would do. If you're going to love your neighbor as yourself, you would extend grace and mercy to somebody else the way that you would like to have it extended to you.
Isn't it false? You to the teacher of the law, it's like the reverse of.
Oh, Susan, you're in the next paragraph. But yes, you're right. See, I think Jesus could have told a story about showing grace and mercy to other people without giving any kind of identity to the men in the story. But because he throws some identification on there, I think there is extra zing on these men. These religious elite, these men whose lives were absorbed with service for God. They're heavily involved in righteous execution of the word. They're more concerned with personal comfort, and they're very strict, very legal adherence to the law than they are showing compassion for another human being. So I think it's not just about we should show mercy and compassion. I think it is, and we don't let our religious purity, we don't try to make it an excuse for failing to demonstrate mercy.
Kind of the intent of the law rather than the letter of the law.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that there. My friend Tim has a line that's something like, a person can be so heavily minded they're of no earthly use.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus would maybe level that at these first two men in the story. They're so concerned with religious devotion that they can't really express what religious devotion is intended to do. To show your love for God by loving other people.
Kind of seems to me like this is kind of to me, a different interaction between Jesus and the guy asking, he's almost a little prickly.
Jesus is?
Yeah. I mean, we've got two lawyers in our family and there's no such thing as a simple question and conversation.
What would you like for breakfast? Well, let me begin by saying,
So outside of the moral of the story, aren't all three of them really his neighbor, and the other two lost their chance to live forever, to get eternal life? I mean,
I think-
outside the story,
I think that-
outside the moral.
I think that undertone is there. Like, if you're asking, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? Love God with everything you are and am, and have, and then love your neighbor as yourself.
Well, they didn't do.
Well, if I've done those things, well, great. But who is my neighbor? Well, so you can follow this back around and say that even if we are religiously devoted and dedicated and serving God, if we are not loving our neighbor, extending mercy to those who need it, and having hearts full of compassion, then it's possible we may forfeit eternal life.
It feels like our neighbors are the ones we have the opportunity to love like ourselves.
Whether they live down the block from us in our neighborhood, or they live in the same county or in the same state or wherever, regardless of their mailing address, if I'm in proximity to somebody and I don't treat them in a loving way, I have totally missed the big point. I'm supposed to love God and love others. And if I'm not going to love others, if we get to 1 John 4, if we don't love the people who are right there with us, we don't really love God either.
Well, isn't it kind of a little beyond the immediate there? Jesus came to, I mean, the Jews were supposed to teach the world about God and they didn't. So that's part of what he was teaching also. He didn't love your neighbor was restricted to your.
Yes, it's not just your Jewish people. Yeah. The Jews kind of started believing their own press at some point along the way. You're the chosen people, God's special holy nation, which they began to interpret as stay out and keep away from us. When I think all along it was supposed to be you shine as an example to all the people around you. You let your light so shine, sort of thing. Because there's plenty of instructions given in the Old Testament. If people want to follow the God of Israel, here's what you do. So it wasn't something that was unthought of or accidental. It's absolutely something that God intended to occur. And at the end of of all of it? Well, the one who showed compassion, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus's answer to this religious leader is go and do the same. Go and do likewise. Don't cross to the other side of the road. Don't choose to remain uninvolved.
Yeah, I keep thinking of Ruth. She wasn't Jewish, but she falls in the lineage of Jesus.
The religious expert is told, don't be like these religious experts. Go and be like a dirty old Samaritan dog. Have compassion for somebody else. Go make it happen. Poieo. Make it with your own hands. Okay. I don't know how many times I've seen that done on Bible skit night at church camp. Love seeing the parable of the Good Samaritan acted out, especially when the bandits come. Junior high and high school boys can really play that up. Yes, Joan.
I appreciate you explaining why the word even talks about the priest and Levite coming down from Jerusalem, because it just, never made much, why would you explain that? But then the Samaritan, it doesn't tell where he came. He just said when he came upon the man. Never says whether he was going up the hill or down the hill. So thank you for explaining that. I appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome. It's possible that I might be reading some things into the story, but if I am, I don't think I'm reading too far. Whether they were serving in Jerusalem or not, they were in the holy city, the place where God's presence dwelt amongst the Israelites.
Right.
A mountaintop, literally religious experience. And they're coming away from that without the ability to extend any mercy and grace, though they have probably been celebrating God's grace and forgiveness through sacrifice. They're not willing to extend grace and mercy to some poor schlub along the side of the road. Because he's naked. They can't tell if he's Jewish or Samaritan.
What? He's naked.
Yeah, they took his clothes. So they don't know who he is. He could be a Jew. He could be a Samaritan. He could be something else.
Would the Samaritan be circumcised?
Well, I don't know how naked he was or how he was laying on the ground.
Talk about or take it over.
Yeah.
But there may have been some distinct clothing features.
True.
The laws about how you're supposed to wear the corners of your clothes and the tassels on the robe and those kinds of things, that's all gone. So
Now I have a different vision.
you can't tell if he's a Republican or a Democrat.
Ugh.
What are you going to do?
No, but there was a way to tell Jew from Gentile back then.
But I don't know if Samaritans were or not, because they would have had some Jewish background.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't ask if I met one.
No, you would just give aid.
Yeah. Okay. We will pick up here when we meet again.
In a few weeks.
2 weeks. I'll be in Indiana next Thursday.
Safe travels.
Yeah, I finally have all of my arrangements all lined up. Hotel stays in all the right places, a rental vehicle for all the right days. gatherings with the right people in the right places on the right days. Like I'm gonna be gone for a week and it feels like I'm living all of it in like in 20 minutes. 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll bring our recording to a close. Thanks for being with us. If there's anything you missed, you can always go back and watch it again and again. I hear my voice is good for putting people to sleep too, so.